Right, so I've got a lot to get through really quickly, but I just thought I would have a little bit of light-hearted fun with you guys. So expect a little bit of swearing. I'm sorry, it's just natural for Scots. If you're easily offended, fuck off. So this talk is entitled the problem with other people's data, the problem with other people's tables. So before we start, let's just get this out of the way, right? An Englishman, an Irishman, and a Scotsman walk into a bar. We all have to leave because the English are bored and want to go home, right? I get a lot of questions about this. As a Scot, I'm kind of impacted by Brexit, which is quite interesting. It's strange as a Scot as well. The English always ask me to slow down, which is a bit strange. We have quite a complex relationship with England. Theresa May can fuck off. It's something that the European Union will come to appreciate very soon, how complex a relationship with England can actually be. Just ask the Irish and us. And this is a negotiation team coming into the last stage of Brexit. You have to remember that we are talking about a bunch of people that allowed XP to be used as an actual-to-God operating system. Great, thanks, guys. Because, fuck logic, right? But it puts me onto an interesting point that password reuse is far more likely to compromise organizations than anything to do with outdated XP. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying go and run outdated XP, but we, as a country, we jumped up and down about the NHS running XP and not having any service contract associated for it. I, of course, am far more worried about doctors, nurses, and the rest that have password 123 as their password, but I'm kind of old-fashioned, I guess. What we have to bear in mind, that now we live in a world where breaches are everywhere, absolutely everywhere, with easily obtainable passwords. Yay, profit. The NHS really got off pretty lightly with WannaCry, because trust me, OSINT, we could have done a lot worse to them than what they got through. So I built a tool out of a talk I gave a while ago. I'll explain a little bit about what it is. Don't worry, it's not a sales pitch. I just want to talk about some of the interesting things we came across, right? So the tool that I built was a tool that enabled us to track data breaches, database dumps. In this particular one, with 61 different data breaches in it. Consider it a bit like a search engine, a showdown for data dumps, right? And I'll explain why that's interesting in a little bit. But it's the old story at the moment that website meets hacker, hacker compromises website, customer's data gets leaked online. It sounds vaguely familiar because we're living that right now, right? But basically, it's a search engine that's only is only interested in third-party data breaches over multiple breaches simultaneously. You can also do conditional types of searches, which is kind of like, yeah, what's cool about that? Well, asking a question and then, depending on the answer, being able to ask another question makes things very powerful. So stuff like, show me everyone that has a plain text password and has the email address with nhs.gov.uk in it. So that's what I mean by a conditional type of search. When I first talked about the tool that we worked on, I spoke one of these management things. And I don't know what it is. I think it's as a Scot, we inspire other people to swear. And it's quite a highbrow, very cool kind of meeting, but it's at the Institute of Directors in London, and they gave me the feedback sheet, and I can guarantee you that all my feedback had swearing in it, every single one of them. No one else got quite as much love. And this has happened lots of times over the years, right? The tool that we used has been used recently in red teaming. This is quite an interesting story. So as I said, there's a whole bunch of third-party data, OSINT, living on the internet, a huge number. It's actually quite, out of those 61 dumps that I talked about earlier on, the data set is 2.9 billion documents. That's not 2.9 billion pieces of information. That's 2.9 billion documents with multiple pieces of information inside it. And that's just the stuff that we could get our hands on that's been dumped on the internet. So it's quite vast. But one of the interesting things when we first worked on this is we got used in a red teaming exercise where they, wonderful. You know it's good when someone has to call you up and tell you how elite they are, right? So they used the search engine, called us up and said, hey, we completely compromised the company within 4 searches. And I'm like, wow, that's interesting. How did you do it? Well, we searched the company, found some password hashes in some dump, tried them, they didn't work. But we thought, hey, that password hash, okay, let's search on the password hashes. And they searched on the password hashes, and they found someone from the company that had reused their corporate password and put it into their Gmail or something like this. And by doing this, what they did to the red team is put a great big red flag on their personal email account. They searched on that personal email account and found a number of other passwords this user had used. And surprise, surprise, one of his corporate passwords was in the list. He'd used it in his personal account too. So within 4 searches, about 3 minutes worth of work, they'd completely and utterly compromised an organization based nothing other than from the information lying on the internet. What's worth remembering in all of this is very, very, very passive OSINT as well. You're not going to be able to detect me downloading the Ashley Madison dump and searching for your company in it, right? No matter how much you would like to, it's not going to happen. We get using some pen tests too. It's kind of cool. I've learned quite a lot from this project. So we take raw data dumps and convert them into JSON, and then we index them. And it's really easy to say that, but it's actually really complex because every problem that you get as a web developer, you get here because JSON, yay, a whole host of things. So I've learned a lot of things in 18 months of doing this. Firstly, I've learned that Vim users are the basic vegans of the internet. I use Vim. And I've also learned that some internet users will use their point-of-sale device password as their actual-to-God password. So this is another example of security professionals calling us up and saying, this is really interesting. Why is it really interesting? So we did a pen test on a company and couldn't get anything. Okay. We ran through the search engine. And we found the number 2 in the company. Adobe password hint was POS password. And you're like, really? Really the POS? Yeah, really the POS password. This is number 2 in the company. Your users are going to use things and put them on the internet without even realizing it. And he'd used the point-of-sale password on so many different things that I had to go and reset all these credit card processing things, right? Yay. They're not the only ones. But I suppose it could be worse, right? I mean, who would use their VPN? Oh, yeah, right. Oh, dear. And I'm not going to bore you with this, carrying on with this, but if you could search this field, what would you put? Bank password? Yay, hits. How about corporate password? Yay, hits. You know, people are using their passwords in a lot of different places. When we started this project, put your hands up if you know who Chris Roberts is. Come on, I know the Swedes are a little bit shy, but put your hands up if you've heard him. So Chris Roberts is an infamous hacker who got into trouble about 18 months ago for saying, if there was an award for the amount of shit that you could get into in 140 characters, I think the award would be named after Chris Roberts. So basically what he did is he had a joke on a plane about hacking the system, the flight system inside the Boeing. Just a joke, right? But unfortunately, they didn't see it that way. So when he landed, he was met by 2 FBI officials and interviewed for quite a while. What's quite ironic is it's just a joke, but Chris has been talking about airplane security for a couple of years. No one paid attention. One tweet and whoa, the world ends, right? So we have this metric now we call Chris Roberts metric. And the Chris Roberts metric is whenever we get a dump, we look for information on Boeing. And the Chris Roberts metric's been quite good to us over the years. So here we go. The Chris Roberts metric, when we first started looking at third-party data breaches in a search engine, was about 153. That was actually Madison, Adult Friend Finder, the lulsec porn list, and a few other things, a lot of lulz, right? And eventually stuff like LinkedIn, MySpace, and so on and so came into it. When it first started, 153 accounts. And now it's sitting around 45,000. And as far as we can work out, the kind of litmus test in a global company of your data being lost in third-party data breaches, we guesstimate it to be around 25 to 30% of your global employees will be in third-party data breaches. And you can see this through the numbers that we look at. You know, we've got 21,000 people in from BBC. They employ 70,000 people. We have 165,000 from HP. They employ 400,000. You know, you can start to see these numbers. So this was 9 months' work to change that from low number to big number. And just to give you a rough idea. And you know what? People just really do have shitty passwords, by the way. I also learned that everyone will experience a third-party data breach. I'm deadly serious about it because, ta-da, oh shit. Yeah, nice. But it happens. And what I've learned from doing this is I used to think that we failed teaching web developers about input sanitation. And I think we do fail massively. But what I know from doing this work is that I know that we completely and utterly fail at working with DBAs too. So nowhere along that line do people really own their data. And what I mean is if you don't believe me, just go and check any email field in any recent SQL dump. It is littered with unvalidated, even regex non-compliant email addresses, right? They're just doing no degrees of protecting that data. What's very interesting as well in a lot of these SQL dumps is you can actually see the enumeration and then the SQL happening. So what happens, you'll look at the data dump and you'll see in the username field, you'll start to see user accounts registered as .. // and da-da-da-da-da. You see all of this enumeration going on, and then you get end of file. And you're like, oh, I wonder what happened there then. Okay. But yeah, there's a real problem here. So let's talk about an interesting dump. And the interesting dump is Freedom Hosting. Do you guys know who Freedom Hosting is? Right, so for those that don't know, Freedom Hosting 2 was a large-scale kind of ISP for dark web, right? It had a free tier. There was 256 megs of space and whatever and blah, 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 blah. And if you needed more, you could buy more from them. So it's actually pretty an interesting data dump because there's a wonderful snapshot of Onion users on the internet, right? It's not quite what it seems, though. So they get compromised, they have a dump, it goes online, and you're like, yay, let's have a look at it. And as I said, it's not quite what it seems at first. I'm far more used to having a database which is all within the realm of the data being dumped. But what was interesting about Freedom Hosting was that they basically had one database for all the databases of their customers. So when you looked at the Freedom Hosting dump, what you're actually looking at is about 10,000 different databases within one database, right? There's a fucking hell of a lot of unhealthy shit in there as well, right? To be fair, right? It puts the lotion on the skin or it gets the hose again. It is a bit weird. This was the big announcement that happened. And they did. They got completely and utterly hacked. Shit. Anonymous claimed responsibility for it, which is quite interesting. Look up at how they pwned. This is how they owned Freedom Hosting. 21 steps. Remarkable, right? I'll give you a couple, just a second, and I'm going to change the slide, right, because I know I'm against the time. If you want this, you'll find it online, no problems. So, time. Yay, flawless victory. And it turns out that it really was 20% of the Onion services that were leaked. There's a lot of research that seems to support this. And also, the private keys were leaked in this dump too. Can you imagine having the keys to the kingdom of 20% of the internet? This is what happened on the dark web, right? Nice. As I said, I'm not sure we've ever seen a dump like that in the clear world. Some of the differences between this data dump and other data dumps that I've processed in the past, well, as I said earlier on, it's a dump within a dump within a dump within a dump. It's like, yo, this shit's really complex and quite hard to deal with. So I used a slightly modified version of a methodology that I've been working on being able to take SQL dumps and convert them into JSON. But what happens when you do things like this is you inherit the complexity of the database. And by its very virtue, the more complex the data structure is, you have to kind of decouple that to make it into JSON and make it searchable. Also, if it's a mess, you have some problems later on. You also need to consider the amount of different applications that you were able to have a look at in the Freedom Hosting dump. It's also very clear that in the Freedom Hosting dump, they gave zero shits about what was being hosted there. It's impossible for them not to have been aware of the hell of a lot of, we'll start off with pedophile material that was there alone, right? Remarkable, really. But the level of security within this is quite interesting because it was pretty much non-existent, and you would have thought that if you're going to commit a crime of such horror, you might want to store your passwords in a little bit better than plain text, right? But we see this time and time again. A fact that I guess most Freedom Hosting pedophiles will be very aware of now, right? As we noticed after the Freedom Hosting dump, you probably will start to see a lot of articles in newspapers about pedophile rings being busted. It's no great surprise that the place where they were hanging out was compromised and, hey, vans turned up and people were arrested. And mostly because of that time-old classic OPSEC, or the absolute fucking lack of it. It was reported that 381,000 email addresses were leaked in this dump, which is interesting. And I can confirm that that seems about right. But as I discussed earlier on, remember that the sanitation of the input field is very unlikely to be being done, right? So that number will be a little bit off. There was also credential swapping and trading sites in the Freedom Hosting dump. So when you pull that number of 381,000 clear net email addresses in the dark web, some of those are actually trading websites where they're trading sections of this stuff too. But there was just under 64,000 clear net domain names associated to email addresses in there as well. So it's kind of strange that you have such a clear net world living in such a place that's supposed to be taken away from it, right? And of all of that, 56,000 had experienced a third-party data breach in the clear net prior to Freedom Hosting. And there was a lot of credential reuse. So can you imagine going onto the dark web with your Gmail and using exactly the same email to go and buy stuff off some marketplace in the dark web? And not only are you going to use the same email, you're going to use the same password too. And there's a lot of occurrences. There's at least 56,000 as far as I can work off, but also as well, likely to be some false positives in that too. So conclusions. The apocalypse has already happened, so thank you for joining us. One day people might start to realize that email is their identity. It is their username, right? Be careful where you put it, because you could end up somewhere weird and wonderful. It's worrying that the standard of deployment is indistinguishable between industry standard and the dark web, right? It's hard to distinguish the quality of work. The same fuck-ups are happening in both places. It's horrible. And these, I'll finish on these. After all of this, I'm going to finish off showing you the passwords that ClearNet dark web users are using, or certainly that we can discover from Freedom Hosting. So are you ready for this? Oh, you assholes. Oh, so there we go. It doesn't matter if you're on the dark web or not, but your users suck at passwords, right? And with that, I would like to thank you for listening to the lightning talk.